All right. So NFL draft is over. Schedule is coming out tomorrow. I got a special guest here. My man Steggy will be joining us live just to check in on the Minnesota Vikings, what they did in the draft, the offseason, where they can and can't get better, and what the future looks like. So let's take a look at the Vikings and let's get into this a little bit. All right, Steggy, what's going on, my man?
Not a whole lot, Brian. Just getting ready for this off season. Excited about some of the moves I know we're going to talk about. We're getting into that weird part of the summer where I'm enjoying all of the nice warmth.
Right.
We got golf season coming up, but there is a little part of me. I'm already wishing away the summer. I'm already ready for that 2023 season.
I like NBA basketball, so I watch it all the way to the finish line. But once it's done, man, that dead period, I call it the dead period. It is creeping up on us. And there's not a whole lot of NFL stuff. They kind of plan it out. They've got the draft, and then they come out with the schedule announcement, and then it's like, there's really not a whole, mini camp, but a lot of people, you can follow it a little bit, I guess, but it's like I said, it's just the dead period, man. I can't wait till training camp starts.
Yeah. Unless you're a big baseball fan, which I wish I could say I was a bigger baseball fan, but I'm a Twins fan, which then also makes me not a big baseball fan. So
I gotcha. I'm a Mets fan, and
you too.
Again, it's just like I said, I just can't get into baseball. There's too many games for me. I just can't get into it. It's way too long. So
yeah, exactly.
But let's get into this a little bit. So the Vikings, great season in my opinion. At least regular season last year. The ending didn't quite go as well as what people anticipated or wanted. Have some holes to fill, I would say, on defense. As a whole, what are Viking fans feeling as far as last season is concerned?
Well, I would say the ones that are realistic. No, I think most of us obviously are very happy with the way that last year went. I personally put the Vikings at about a 10-11 win team last year. And I even thought, really, if I'm being honest, my heart of hearts here, that might have been a little bit generous. So to end up at 13-4 certainly was, they were overachievers, and you can see it with all the 1-score wins. They were overachievers. They were overachievers last year, but I would say that, we certainly saw the progression of Justin Jefferson. Loved to see the progressive approach that we saw from KOC, Kevin O'Connell, our new head coach last year, and then the new GM, Kwesi, Adolfo Mensa. So I think we saw some, again, just building blocks in place where we're going to need to get younger. We need to form a new young nucleus with this team. But I think they took an approach where we're not letting the window close quite yet. So
Gotcha.
there's still a lot of good pieces there.
Absolutely. The thing, and I know a lot of people, obviously Minnesota fans, but outside looking in, the main issue with the Vikings last year, defense. Looking at the draft, did the Vikings plug enough holes per se, or what are you thinking? Just again, as outside looking in, did they do enough in the draft to fill? Obviously, you can't fill every position, but have they done enough? I guess we'll combine it with the draft and free agency.
Tough question to answer. I would say, from my perspective, my opinion, there was just no way they were going to plug all the holes in this ship. There were two main areas where I wanted to see them address this offseason, whether, again, like you said, through free agency or the draft. That was either going to be or either one, the two most important was going to be quarterback. So a successor for Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins, his contract is up after this year. Right. And the Vikings made it relatively clear, more through actions than anything that they said, that this is going to be Kirk's last year in Minnesota. So, we got to address the successor to Cousins. The other aspect, as you mentioned, was the defense. I mean, the defense was very, very poor. Now, the one thing that made me a little less tense or a little less worried about the defense is that we brought in Brian Flores this offseason.
Right.
A lot of respect for Brian Flores. He's done a lot of great things in this league, especially on the defensive side of the ball. He knows defense. He knows how to call a defense, and he understands how to play to the strengths of his players. So I was not a big fan of Ed Donatel, who we had last year in the defensive coordinator spot. I could go on for an entire hour about my issues with that scheme.
Right.
It was very poor. So I think what we saw last year, and this is what I'm hanging my hat on, is that it was probably a mix of poor scheme and maybe some personnel getting a little longer in the tooth. You're talking about guys like Eric Kendricks, probably a little past the hump in his prime. Other guys that just didn't work out from free agency and from 22, guys like Jordan Hicks, Chandon Sullivan, who was playing in the slot. I mean, both of those guys looked really lost in that defense and became liabilities. And then the secondary, you had Patrick Peterson, who was, look, I love, P2, but he's long in the tooth. I mean, he's at the stage of his career where he's almost like a player's coach. Not to say that he can't be effective. I think he can be, but to look at him as like your number one, where he's going to cover, the Justin Jeffersons of the world. Like I wouldn't want him doing that game in and game out. And he was basically forced into that position with the Vikings because of how poor that secondary is. So I think that with the limited amount of picks that the Vikings had and the very limited amount of cap room that this team had, I mean, we were over the cap going into the offseason. It was going to be really, really tough to address both of those needs. And I don't know. I mean, I think that we've done some good things. I know we'll get into the picks here, but I think I'll say this. I think the Vikings will be a better team in 2023 than they were in 2022, but they will have a worse record. So I think this team is probably going to get back to like that 10-win-ish spot, but I do think they'll be a more well-rounded team. So,
well, one of the things, and you mentioned it earlier, is being their record in those one-score games. They won they won them all. They won all of those games. So it's tough to go in and have 1 or 2 years in a row where you win all of those games. I mean, if they only win 50% of those games, last year, we're looking at a totally different scenario. So I think one of the things as far as the Vikings, I'm kind of with you. I think they may have a better team. Their record will be worse, but especially if we're talking one-score games. Look, nobody's going to continue to win one-score games like that. That's not going to happen. You're not going to win them all. Sheer numbers will catch up with you. So I think they will be better. Let's look at the draft. The needs that they hit, or the draft picks that they took. What are Vikings fans feeling? What are you feeling? Do you think they did enough? Did you think they hit on the areas that they needed to hit on?
Well, I will say this. The overarching theme I've been telling every Vikings fan that will listen to me is that I truly think we ended up with 6 picks in this draft. Mm-hmm. So we started with 5. We ended with 6 picks. I think every player, all 6 players that the Vikings drafted, have a chance to make the 53, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I think that might sound like Looney Tunes at this stage of the year, but most fans forget that once we get into training camp, not all these picks that teams choose are going to make the team. No. Right? Like they're either going to get cut, they might even be out of the league, right? They might not even end up on a practice squad. So I truly believe that all 6 of these guys have a chance to make the roster, which I haven't been able to say in the past. Now, that being said, that's the positive. We did not address the successor to Kirk Cousins like that. Right. That did not happen. I thought there was a possibility that the Vikings could have taken Will Levis at 23. I'm not saying that I would have been in favor of that move. I wasn't really high on Levis. However, there was some reports out there that Kevin O'Connell was pretty high on Levis, that he felt like that there was something there with Kevin O'Connell being an ex-coach, or not ex-coach, ex-quarterback. Obviously, he is a current coach. Let's hope he's not an ex-coach anytime soon, but an ex-quarterback in this league. You know, he understands the position. He's relatively young, so he kind of understands today's game a little more. And, you know, maybe you give him a shot. If the Vikings would have taken Levis at 23 or even traded back from 23 and then taken Levis, let's say, at the top of the second round, which I also thought was a possibility, you know, look, I would have been fine with it. I'm a Vikings fan. So if the guy's wearing purple, of course I'm going to want the best for him. Sure. So I was a little surprised they didn't do that. I'll be quite honest with you. The Addison pick at 23, I don't hate the pick. I really didn't like it when it happened. And I think for the reasons that I laid out just a moment ago, when I looked at the team and how many picks that we had, I thought to myself, we've got 5 picks. Right? Because that's what we started with, 5 picks, and we don't have a second rounder, and we pick late in the third round. Right. So it's like the 2 needs I mentioned, successor to Kirk Cousins in defense, and then you go receiver, and then basically you have to wait almost 2 rounds to pick again. It was like, to me, it felt like not a great pick. I'll be honest with you.
Sure.
But the more I've digested it, I think if they love the guy, and if they really feel like he could be something dynamic and special, then you got to take him. And so I've done a little bit more research on Addison. I do like him. Do I think he's going to even come close to usurping Justin Jefferson? Absolutely not. But do I think he has a chance to get into that number 2 spot and really give us a true wide receiver 2 that neither KJ Osborne or Adam Thielen could have been in the last 2 years? Yes, I do think he could be that guy. And my prediction is that he slides into that spot by about week 4. That's my prediction with him. Gotcha. And I do like KJ Osborne, but I think he is more of a number 3. I think he's like a high-end number 3, sure, low-end number 2, and I do think Addison could be a decent number 2. So I'm okay with that pick. I'll give you kind of a rundown of some of the other picks, just because, you know, you're going to ask. I know you're going to ask anyway. We went to round 3. We got Mekhi Blackmon, a corner out of USC. So another USC product. Really like this pick. I probably like this pick more than the Addison pick because, number one, it addresses a need, right, at corner. And I just love the style of play. Aggressive player. I think he's going to fit in so well with Flores and the scheme that he likes to run. Sure tackler, doesn't mind getting up on the line, playing the run. The one thing I'm a little concerned with him is with a lot of these guys that are kind of the aggressive corners, you know, he's going to have to be careful in that rookie season. Like the college game, they let these guys play a little bit on the outside. In the NFL, you know, I was watching a highlight, and again, I'm excited about Mekhi Blackmon, but I watched a highlight reel that got released. I think it was by the team after that pick. And I'm watching the highlights and I'm going, that's pass interference. That's pass interference. Like, you know, and, you know, so he's going to have to be careful. It's a lot like basketball in a way where these guys have to learn how to use their hands in a way that doesn't telegraph some of the pulling and the fighting. Because if he can't get that down, he's going to be a liability because he's not going to be able to stop getting penalized. So I like the pick, but that's going to be my concern with him is can he stop drawing yellows, in my opinion. Yeah. And then we had a couple more picks. You know, we had Jay Ward out of LSU, who is kind of this hybrid safety corner. I like him because, again, he's another guy that's on the back end of the defense, which we need. We need more bodies. I like his versatility more than anything. Another guy that I think kind of has a decent floor, if you will. I think he'll be a good player. I'm not going to address all these, but I'm going to go to the one that you might actually care about, which is the Jaron Hall pick. We got him in round 5, quarterback out of BYU. You know, a lot of people are going to say, is he maybe the answer, right? Is this guy potentially the answer to the future and post Kirk Cousins? Is he the heir apparent? I don't see it. I think the more likely scenario is he is the heir apparent to Nick Mullins.
Right.
And because Nick Mullins, not that, anybody outside of Viking Nation isn't going to probably care to know this, but Kirk Cousins and Nick Mullins are both, their contracts are up at the end of this year. So we're losing essentially our first and second string quarterback, at least if, nobody signs an extension. So I think he'll probably be an okay backup. I see that maybe, but I have some intel from a guy who, if anybody else out there wants to enjoy his content, Vikings content, he is on Climbing the Pocket, Mr. Matt Anderson. I had a really great conversation with him about 3 weeks ago, actually, about Jaron Hall. This is before the draft. And he was at the Senior Bowl, the gentleman I'm talking about, or who I was talking to, and he said that it was not good. He was not impressed with Mr. Jaron Hall at the Senior Bowl. So, and I get it's one weekend that he's there. It's, and everybody can have an off game, practices, right? Like, we're not trying to dwindle a whole guy's career down to one experience, but usually guys that have some talent, even on their off days, you go, I think there's something there. Right. Not the way he put it to me was, do you remember when Donovan McNabb came to the Vikings for a season? And I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah, about that bad. And I went, oh, okay. Yeah. So, and there was some miscellaneous other picks. I think there was a defensive tackle we took that I think, again, is a good depth pickup. We got a running back late, which, again, really just signals the fact that the Vikings are ready to move on from Dalvin Cook. So,
right.
I think we've got 3 running backs, including the rookie. Now that's on top of Dalvin Cook. So I think his time in Minnesota is all but done. It's really just going to be, does he get cut or does he get traded?
Right. Yeah. I think that's kind of the understanding league wide is that Dalvin Cook is going to be available. Let's just say that. And I think he's been available. I think the Vikings may have been looking for something, but in the draft, and teams are just like, nah, we're not going to give you that for a running back. Yeah. And I think it's going to be a thing where he gets cut and gets signed somewhere else. As far as Kirk Cousins, getting a predecessor to Cousins, it's almost like the Vikings are like, because usually when a guy has 1 year left, they'll try to move on. If they're moving on, they'll just move on and get somebody else. And the Vikings didn't do that. So are they just all in trying to win with them? That's kind of my thinking. And again, from the outside looking in, it's like, okay, we've got them this last year. Let's go try to win something, which is why they went receiver, in the first round. Are they just thinking, you know what, we've got them, let's see what we can get? Because I just have a hard time believing that no matter what, because Cousins has put up great numbers, unless they win the Super Bowl, I don't care what he does, they are moving on from him and they are not going to sign him back. Is that kind of the consensus?
I think so. I really do. I mean, there was a little bit of backpedaling after the draft. Sure. I think that the messaging was pretty clear before the draft that there's not going to be an extension.
Right.
It sounded like, and you never know how much of this is true, but there was some leaked news that Cousins approached the organization, which, I'm his agent, most likely, not him personally. And they talked about a more team-friendly extension. Now, what does that look like? You can really read between the lines on that. Because in my opinion, if you're thinking like, oh, well, he's going to take a pay cut, I'm sure what it was is he was probably willing to take a below market value extension, which value right now is sky high, as we all know.
Absolutely.
So, he probably was still looking to get a bump in pay, but maybe not as much as he could have gotten, somewhere else. So I don't know. And it sounds like they refused, not refused, but they turned down that offer.
Right.
So I think that they made that pretty clear that they were going to move on. What I think may have happened, and look, I want to trust the new regime. I really do, because I like all the players. And I also think that we need to allow them to have some bumps in the road, because look, I don't know if you've ever had a new job. I certainly have. You're not amazing at it usually from the get-go. It takes a little time, And so in my opinion, and again, this is speculation, I think that the Vikings really thought that they were going to have some quarterbacks slide a lot further in the draft that weren't named Will Levis. And so I really think that they thought they could maybe try to snag a guy like Anthony Richardson at like 11, maybe 12. And then there was some reports that came out this week, I think it was earlier this week, that said that the Vikings had actually put out some feelers to try to move up to snag Bryce Young if he would not have been taken at 1. So now, granted, I have to imagine a lot of teams were kicking the tires there, right? Like they're always going to see what is it going to cost, right? Because that's not going to harm you, right? What does it cost? So I think that the Vikings probably looked at, maybe getting a quarterback early in this draft. I just think the way that the draft played out with Young going first overall, which I agree with, Stroud then going right away, which of course there was all the chatter that he was going to slide super far. And then you've got Richardson going at 4. I just think they thought, well, we're not in love with Levis. I honestly think the Vikings probably tried to trade back. I mean, the clock went all the way down to 30 seconds before they took Addison. And I know the messaging is going to be, we love Addison. He was our guy. If he fell to us, we were going to take him regardless. But then why did it take you almost until time expired to put in the pick? So my opinion is that they probably were entertaining a lot of offers to trade back, and none of them made sense. And then they took Addison, who they did like. So,
sure. But that's smart, though. That's smart.
Yeah.
I mean, because the one thing that the Vikings need is players and top-end guys. That's the same thing with the Steelers. I was stressing that all along was with the Steelers, look, they kept talking about trading back from 32 or possibly trading back 17. And I said, no, we don't need to do that. The Steelers need top-end players that can come in and contribute and make a difference right now. And I think the Vikings are the same way. So say they could trade back and pick up a second-round pick. It made sense to try to do that because, again, the Vikings aren't technically that far away. And if they can get guys in position to make a difference right now, that's what you got to do. Now, again, I agree with you. We loved Addison. And I think that's what every team always says. We love him, we love him, we love him. But yet we took every opportunity to see if we could make the team better in a different way. Okay, that doesn't work. Great, we're going to take this guy. I think that's what they did. And it just makes sense to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as the long view of what they're going to do at the quarterback position, because they didn't, go quarterback early on, like I mentioned, I kind of teased this. They did a little backpedaling after the draft where I don't remember if it was Kevin O'Connell or GM Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. I can't remember which one, but they came out and said, well, all the options are still on the table when asked about an extension for Cousins. I just truly think, in my opinion, is that they probably look at that situation and go, we don't want this guy on like a 3-year deal.
Right.
We want him on like a 1, maybe 2-year deal if we're going to do an extension. And I think Kirk knows. I mean, look, as much as I rag on Kirk Cousins, the guy has one of the highest floors, in the quarterback market. I mean, he really does. And that's the thing. That's the allure. You take a guy like Kirk Cousins and you put him on a Super Bowl roster, like the San Francisco 49ers, for instance, and that's a hell of a team. I mean, I think he could take them to a Super Bowl and win it. But that's more about the Niners than it is about Kirk Cousins.
Absolutely.
Kirk Cousins is like, I've said this how many times on the Skull Purple podcast, shameless plug for everybody, is that, he's very, he's rarely bad. Rarely is he bad, but he's also seldom great. He's just good a lot. And that's fine. That's fine if you are a franchise that always wants to compete for playoffs every year. I think that's good. But if you're a team that wants to compete for Super Bowls, it's just not enough. And,
No.
the Vikings don't have a Super Bowl caliber roster. And you either need that or a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. So my opinion is, they're probably looking at maybe an extension, but it's going to be real short. And Kirk Cousins is probably looking at this going, if I hit the open market, there's going to be a decent amount of teams that are going to offer me a 3-year deal, so they might not be good franchises, but they'll do it. So I think that the Vikings have to hope for one of two scenarios, and I'll kind of bookend it with this on this topic with you, Brian, because I love to talk. It's the Vikings have to hope for one of two scenarios. The first one is that they have an amazing year. Kirk Cousins comes out, balls out because it's a contract year. Addison looks amazing. Justin Jefferson continues to skyrocket. Flores gets this defense looking scrappy, kind of like the defense that we used to see in Carolina a lot, where, if they had a clean pocket, and sat around for too long, you were kind of like, I don't know about this defense, but they got so much pressure, created a lot of turnovers.
Right.
Maybe we see that. And all of a sudden the Vikings are in like playoff contention. They go to the NFC Championship game, maybe the Super Bowl. That's scenario number one you have to hope for, because obviously, no kidding, every team wants that. The second scenario, though, is the exact opposite, that things fall apart and the Vikings have some horrid season because of hopefully not critical injuries, but, injuries happen. It's the NFL.
Sure.
The schedule, they're playing a first place schedule against we've got the AFC West this year. It's just, if this team goes like 3-14 or 4-13, that's the other great scenario for the Vikings. Because if this team goes 9-8, 8-9, boy, they're going to be in a really tough spot at that quarterback position. Because now you're going to be picking too far away to try to trade up for, guys like May and, some of these other big names. But you're also, now you've got a quarterback that's going, I can go out and get all this money on the open market. It's just, you got to almost hope for like boom or bust if you're the Vikings organization this year. So they're in a tough spot. I don't know what they're going to do. I obviously hope for the Super Bowl scenario, but I'll be honest, if it's not going to be Super Bowl, it really is Super Bowl or bust, man. I hope they just are terrible, because then let's take some high-end, prospect and, see if we can get the next Patrick Mahomes.
Gotcha. Totally understand. Look, the Steelers have been picking in that range forever. It seems like the only time that we moved up, we just made a great decision and took Devin Bush at linebacker position. Just worked out perfectly. So, moving on, free agency. What did the Vikings do, and did they cover up enough holes? Again, I know you mentioned that they had some salary cap issues, and the whole, you saw them just dumping guys, just like most teams do. Did they do enough in your eyes and a lot of Vikings fans' eyes in free agency to kind of, I shouldn't say plug holes, but again, just kind of patchwork something together to where I'm just going to stick with the defense, because I feel like the Vikings offense is pretty good. Obviously, they can everybody can use an upgrade in offensive line. I mean, that's just the way football works. So I won't even mention that. Did they do enough in free agency to kind of patchwork some things together defensively? So other than Brian Flores, because that's key. Getting an offensive coordinator is huge, and you have to count that. You have to count that. So did they do enough to patchwork some things together to put together a better product defensively on the field?
They didn't do a lot in free agency. It felt like the moves that they made in free agency were made with the idea in the back of their mind that they didn't have a lot of cap space.
Right.
So it's like, we're going to do the most we can with the little amount of room, capital that we have left, or at least that we can generate from cutting players. Because that's basically what happened. And we had to start releasing guys like Eric Kendricks so we could just get some room. And a guy like Adam Thielen is another good example. So they made a couple of good moves. I'd say the splashiest move was Byron Murphy, corner from Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that they got him for less than I would have expected to see him get on the open market because, as a lot of teams end up having to overpay. I
Sure.
didn't feel like they really had to overpay for Murphy. I thought he got pretty fair value there for the team and for him. So excited to see him come in. He's 25 years old. Is he a guy that's a shutdown corner? No, I mean, obviously, otherwise he probably would have demanded more money than he did. But he showed some flashes in Arizona. And again, having a guy like Flores, he fits within that more aggressive scheme. The man, playing a lot of man coverage. I think he'll fit well there. So I'm excited about that. He'll probably be essentially filling the shoes that Patrick Peterson left here. So I expect him to probably fill in that number one spot. And then the other picks that you saw, I know there were a few that I'm not even going to mention because they were more depth signings, but I'd say the other two that were more noteworthy, if you want to call them that, was Marcus Davenport from the Saints. He's a guy that, the Saints traded up to get in the first round. I would say he probably did not pan out. If you would talk to Saints fans, they would say, I don't know if that worked out too well. But look, if you look at the structure of the contract, I think it was a 2-year deal. Really, it's a 1-year prove it. If you look at the structure, we can cut ties pretty much scot-free after the first year. And I think they just looked at it like, look, this guy obviously has talent. He had a lot of talent coming out of college. So can our staff get out of him what the Saints couldn't? That's what they're banking on.
Right.
Can we get this extra gear out of him and get something, where he's a viable option? So we'll see. The other one that I think was a head scratcher for a lot of people was Josh Oliver, tight end from Baltimore that they signed. We have TJ Hawkinson, obviously, in my opinion, top 5 tight end in the league. I don't think that's too controversial.
No, not at all.
And so, you don't really need a tight end per se. And the way he was used in Baltimore was primarily a blocking tight end, and a very good one at that. I will give you that. But the more, again, I dug in, the guy's got some hands. The guy has some athletic abilities. Big body guy. Caught a lot of passes in college. But if you just look how they've utilized him in the NFL, look, when he's on Baltimore, who's opposite of Josh Oliver in Baltimore? You got Mark Andrews, right? So of course he's not going to be your number one target. You're not going to throw him out there as your pass catching tight end when you've got Mark Andrews. But when Mark Andrews went down last year, Oliver stepped in, and I know they had Likely was the other rookie that I think they drafted last year. Both of them I thought looked good, and Oliver looked serviceable. So I don't mind the pick. I think it provides some flexibility, especially if we come out in like 11 personnel, where we're going to run some big sets. So I'm that's the dark horse for me, where I go, I think this guy's going to be kind of a sneaky good pickup for this team. He might not show up every week, but I like that pickup for the Vikings.
Gotcha. So with everything said and done, now don't get me wrong, we're going to bring you back before we make some predictions. We haven't hit the June 1st mark yet, to see who, like I said, Dalvin Cook. I would be extremely surprised if he is on the roster, come training camp. So, but look, starting now, just looking at it, what are you thinking as far as the future for this year? We can't. Football is one of those things, or all sports. You put it together piece by piece, year by year. So you can't predict 5-6 years down the road. So we're not talking about that. Just this year, are you thinking the Vikings have an opportunity to make the playoffs? Because I personally, look, you're going to love this from me. I think that the Lions, that everybody's jumping on that bandwagon, I think the Lions are going to be that team that everybody believes is going to be great and is going to completely fall off. Because, look, about 65% of the season last year, the Vikings were awful. Or not the Vikings, the Lions were awful. The Lions were just awful. And they got hot late, and I give them credit. You got to give them credit. But everybody's jumping on that bandwagon. I personally believe that the NFC North still goes through Minnesota. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. And I think it's even more apparent now that, Poxitani Rogers is out of Green Bay. He came out of his cave and saw a shadow, and now he's in New York. I think that the division at this point, no matter what you really think about the Lions or the Bears, I mean, some people even have the Bears getting up there.
Not yet. Not yet.
I think it still has to run through Minnesota at this point. And I don't care how much the Packer fans want to tell me that Jordan Love is going to be the next amazing quarterback. I just can't see lightning striking 3 times for one organization back to back Hall of Fame quarterbacks. I think is pretty unlikely. So I think that the Packers, I think the way this season will probably stack up. And as you mentioned, there's still a period of time where we might see moves, guys getting cut. You might see guys get signed, right? Depending on who gets cut from other teams. Absolutely. And then there's health and all this other stuff. But if everything being equal and, nobody gets injured, everything's just on paper, I'd say 4th in the division's probably Green Bay. I just think they're going to regress that bad. To be honest with you, I think that's part of the plan. My conspiracy theory with them and this trade with the Jets is that's what took so long, is that Green Bay really wanted picks next year for next year's draft because they wanted to use those picks to trade up to be able to get one of the top 2 quarterbacks next year. Yep. That's my prediction.
It's not a conspiracy, man. A lot of people are saying the same thing. A lot of people. I don't think it's conspiracy at all. I think they know what they have. I don't think they know. I think they know that it's not going to be enough. And I think the Packers are like, we can package all of this, go get one of the top 2 picks, depending on where they finish. And that's what they're doing. A lot of people are saying the same thing. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So I think the Packers are realistically, this is going to sound rough, but I think the Packers are probably a 4 to 5, maybe 6 win team next year.
Yeah.
Which the fan base is, I don't know what they're going to do in Green Bay. And then I would say Chicago, but Chicago is going to be right there. I think Chicago is going to be a 5, 6, maybe 7 win team at most. Yeah. And then the Lions, like you mentioned, the thing with the Lions is that the Lions are the NFC version of the Browns, right? There's always going to be something. Everybody was hyped up about the Lions this offseason, and then guess what happens? Yep. All of a sudden they're betting on football, right? Yep. And it's like, come on. And that's been the talk with a lot of us fans in the NFC North is like the Lions are going to lion. Like, I don't know. So I agree with you. I think they will probably be better, but I still think they end up in that like 7 to 9 win range. I think 10 wins the division this year.
Yeah, I think so too. I think 10 wins gets it. I just don't think the Lions get there. Look, the Lions started on draft day. I mean, taking a running back at 12 that they could have taken. I don't discount the pick because I think it was a great pick, but where they took him when they didn't have to is the Lions being the Lions. And the Lions are trying to replace their quarterback. A 28, 29-year-old, I think Goff is 28 or 29 years old. Sorry, 29-year-old quarterback playing well. Yeah, we can't use that. It's just absolutely insane. And that's why the Lions are going to be the Lions. Again, like I said, I think that the NFC North still goes through Minnesota, man. So thank you for joining us today, man. I appreciate it. Every time I get to talk to you is always a pleasure, man. Please tell everybody where they can find you and check out any other Viking type stuff.
Yeah, well, likewise, Brian, it's always a pleasure talking with you. So anytime you need me, you just give me a holler. You guys can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. No, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, Steggy Stories, just as it sounds, STEGGIE Stories. And then I am also on the Skull Purple podcast, which we are on YouTube. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, iHeartRadio. We might even put a little sign in your front yard if you want us to.
I got you, man. Well, I appreciate you joining us. We will definitely have you back at least one more time, probably two, before the season gets started. So thanks, Steggy. I appreciate it, man. You have a good one.
Absolutely, Brian. Thank you.